trying to project that back into its three-dimensional reality, it's not going to match up the same either way, because you're trying to make sense of three dimensions in a two-dimensional picture that was skewed.
Okay, but you do
So it's going to
realize
affect
that
the perspective and.
Well, you do realize that skew is a linear transform, and this is a nonlinear discontinuity.
Well, I'm not a professional in optics, and I've done as much research as I could since I got the links from Kyle, and I'm trying to be but I hadn't had anybody show me this Photoshop stuff or nothing. I went and did all that on my own. Now, when you're talking about skewing a photo, you're actually talking about reducing the total size. You're not reducing what's in the photo, so it's not like you're cutting it off on the sides or anything like that. You can obviously tell here that the photo is not just skewed in one direction or it's all skewed together. There's actually portions of the photo that have been skewed in two directions. So trying to make sense of this three-dimensionally and say, oh, this is evidence that this shouldn't line up, at that point it just makes no sense to me, because I look at the picture and I say, well, this picture has been altered, and and it's not just been altered consistently across the picture. It's been altered in one type of alteration on the top right that's different than the alteration from the bottom right. That's also different.
I don't think that's what happened at all. So yes, you can have skew in two directions. I mean, you could just have a skew like a parallelogram. That's still a linear transform. And like I said, what we're observing here is a nonlinear discontinuity in the parallax.
Okay, but that's still not until you can demonstrate how this is not an artifact of the photoshopping that was done to the photo, then I'm just not prepared to believe it. I still will stand by the fact that this absolutely fits within what I think would happen if we pulled the photo out and used the original photo, which you can't do because they're obviously taken from different points of view. This is what makes it hard to make sense of a three dimensions on a two-dimensional piece of paper.
Okay, but we can see from, so you know that are they called faculae? I forget. So there's these crosses on the image, and they're in the center of the image. There's actually a much bigger cross, and then there's 8 crosses surrounding it, and so we can actually tell the amount of rotation that occurred during the two images by just comparing these two central crosses. And what you might be surprised about is that the camera angle dropped more than it rotated. So rotation wouldn't really account for what we're seeing here. And again, these kinds of linear transformations that they're making, these skews, won't account for a nonlinear discontinuity. And again, so just ignoring the discontinuity, let's look at the parallax of St. George. So this is supposedly a geological feature that is 6 kilometers away, and I think you can tell quite easily that is no more than about 50 meters away, just from the parallax of the image.
Again, it's skewed so that certain portions of the background will match each other, so you can make a comparison. That image to me is not moving so significantly that you would see the parallax from 50 meters away. I wouldn't look at that photo even before I knew it was skewed and think that was only 50 meters away.
Okay, so that's just, your observation. But the other thing is you're the one that's now making a positive claim that linear transforms can make nonlinearities, and you keep making that claim.
Well, that'd be pretty dishonest. That'd be pretty dishonest of me to say that and not know what I'm talking about. I've only pointed out the simple fact that the first thing I noticed when I looked at this evidence with a critical eye, the very first thing I noticed was that it was no longer a square image. It wasn't even consistent with, like, say, oh, well, we know he was here, we know he was taking it from here, and this is the transformation we have to make sense of this two-dimensional image so that they're both of the same everything. I see that you've made the rover somewhat similar, or not you, but the person who's created the image has made the rover somewhat similar in size, but even that shows that there was a significant amount of change relative to the rover, there was a significant amount of change, enough to increase the size
Yeah,
by
about
as much as it
about
has.
10 to 20 centimeters. No, well, about 10 to 20 centimeters. That's the estimate, the best estimates we have of those pair of images. So that's not that much of a shift. And again, it's not that much of a turn either. And again,
Where are you getting the
neither
10?
of
Can
those
you
would.
tell me where we're getting the 10 to 20 centimeters estimate?
Well, we know the size of the rover, and we can tell from the ground about how far the rover is. I mean, from the
Hold
camera,
on. Let
because
me
we
let me
we know the
pull up
size.
the let me pull up the two full size images, and okay, that's
Mhm.
not 10 to
But I
20
mean, I
centimeters right there. I can even
that
bring them in
it
on
is.
top of each
It's
other. And hold on one second. Let me bring the rovers on top of each other and see. Let, hold on, let me change the opacity a little bit so we can see through it. Okay, look right there. That's not a 10 to 20 centimeter change of angular size right there. You're not going to get that much of a change for 10 to 20 centimeters when you're
you
as
don't
far
you
away from
wouldn't
that rover
expect
as you are.
you wouldn't expect a difference in apparent angle from a pan. Pans don't change the angle of objects.
Right, the
Only the
distance
zoom
to
angles
I mean,
do.
obviously that those two tires are the same size. The two tires are the same
Yeah.
size, and one
So that's
represents
expect.
at
So
least
that's
a
expected.
10%. You think it
So that's
would increase in
expected with a
size by
pan.
10% from you think it would increase in size by 10% from about 5 inches of moving towards the vehicle? That's not how
No, I don't. But it doesn't. That's not apparent in the
I mean, I'm
image.
talking about perspective here. Like when you're moving towards that, you're saying that there was a 10 to 20. We're just going top to bottom. I'm not worried about the angle that the two tires are at right now. We're going top to bottom. I have it lined up decently. I mean, I can try to get it closer, I
Yeah,
guess.
sure. I
But
see. I see what you got. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, whoops, wrong button.
Okay,
All right.
but so I just don't understand. I mean, how is any of this relevant to the discontinuity and parallax that's observable? I mean, where? So I linked the topographic maps. The topographic maps say that this is Mount Hadley in the background. They call it the Apennines, or there's a few different names
Apennine
for the
front.
mountain range.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So do you agree that this mountain that's in the background is 6 kilometers away on the moon from the landing site?
If you, I am not in dispute of what the topographical maps say that should be. So
Sure. So
if
we
you, I don't have
agree.
the exact number. So yeah, as long as you're quoting the number that NASA says, or you're quoting the numbers that are off the topographical map, I'm prepared to
Hmm.
accept that for your argument.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And I think that there's two reasons to doubt that given these images. One is the discontinuity and parallax, and two is the observed parallax. So, like I said, the discontinuity and parallax is this line where it seems like there's a stage floor meeting a backdrop. And again, when the camera is moving in front of the backdrop, uh, that is actually causing its own parallax of the backdrop, and so that indicates the distance from the camera. And so there's nothing in these images that would indicate that this background that is present is 6 kilometers away. Everything indicates that it's about 50 meters away.
I mean, you say everything indicates, but I would like to know what that everything includes. I mean, the two images you showed me so far, and I mean, I can agree that
Hmm.
it may look to somebody as if it's meeting a backdrop, but that doesn't mean that it is
Right.
meeting a backdrop. We're looking at images that have been altered, and the one that you're saying that it looks like it's hitting a backdrop is where there's just so a distinct line that's coming across, basically.
Well, again, you've
That
you've never made the
I'm not
case that
looking
the
at your image right
alterations.
now. Go ahead.
Well, sure, but you've never made the case that these linear transformations would create the kind of discontinuities that are observed. I mean, you still keep
Hmm.
going back to that claim, and it's still just a claim.
Right, but I'm saying that I don't know that that's not the case. You're not explaining, to me
I told
why
you,
what I
I
just
explained
showed
to you
you
very
is not
simply.
well, you said it, yes, but explain it. Like, how is it not going
I
to affect that when we've changed the dimensions of the image?
I told you.
And
So
we've put the image in
skewing.
a position to
Let's
where one point on the image.
right.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
let's do this because I don't think we're gonna agree on that image thing. Ace, is the image, is that your only basis for why you think that we didn't go to the moon?
Well, so okay, I guess I should get into this as well. So, I mean, let's say for a second that Team Skeptic said, okay, sure, let's assume that this image is fake. So
Mm-hmm.
what comes of that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the question, and so I don't think that there is a deductive argument that you could state, given this premise of this image and some other premises, that you can deductively conclude that we never went to the moon. There's all these other options like, oh, they did go to the moon, but the footage got destroyed because of the cosmic particles and all this kind of stuff, and so thus NASA was forced to recreate these images because of the fact that they were destroyed. That's a reasonable consideration, assuming that these images are fake. The problem with that position is that just means that NASA is publicly lying. They are presenting these images as official, as if they were taken on the moon, and yet by assuming that they're fake, that concludes that NASA has been lying for decades to the public.
Mm-hmm. So again, is the image, like, do you have anything? I guess I'm trying to figure out, is that the only basis by which you say or by which you think we didn't go to the moon? Like, do you have any other? I'm just curious. I'm just asking. Like, we can go into that.
I mean, yeah, sure. I think you should start with your. I think you should start with your strongest foot forward and keep arguing the point. And if it hasn't been properly rebutted, then why provide other pieces of evidence that could just further distract from the question?
So those two photos would be your strongest evidence, then.
Yeah, that's
discrepancies. Because, by the way,
right.
Real quick, if I can, you mentioned something that those black crosses, right? They're called registration marks, and what they're used for is for if there's any kind of deformation in the processing of the film back then, because it was a negative, right? So if back then, when you had to actually process some of this stuff, there could have been either deformations in the actual film, or there could have been artifacts that were produced because of the process they used to process the negatives. So that's what those registration marks are used for. So they don't have in the background, especially what you're talking about. So because those are in there, and because the parallax that what Team Skeptics is talking about, I'm not seeing the argument that you're fully pointing forth, because we would expect there to be parallax from those things, the different distance. We'd expect some, the fact that you're not going to have high resolution, right? Because you're going to have some.
No, you wouldn't expect any. Well, why would you expect visible parallax of objects that are 6 kilometers away? If let's assume even on the far end that it was a 50 centimeter shift of the camera, right? Not 10 or 20, but say a full 2 feet. Even with a full 2 feet of
small
panning
changes
of
end up
camera,
with large scales the further you go away. Further distance,
exactly.
Anybody who's looked through a telescope.
Also, it would be different if they're both pointing in the exact same direction or similar directions, but you can tell from that front tire, and I didn't get into covering that the camera actually moved its position, like it was no longer pointing in the same direction. It slightly moved just a little bit. I mean, it wasn't a lot. It was a little bit, but you're also dealing with 3 dimensions at that point, not 2. So when you're dealing with 3 dimensions, you go ahead.
The camera dropped more than it actually rotated. And I think it actually dropped, say 3 times more than it actually rotated. So
even if I concede that point, you're still missing my point. It rotated. The fact that it rotated means that, like Steve said, smaller changes further in the distance. When you rotate, they're going to have you're not going to be looking directly at let's say a 2 degree rotation, right? Well, 2 degree rotation 2 feet in front of you is not very much. You're still basically looking at the same spot, but you take 6 kilometers away and just changing the camera 2 degrees in rotation, that's going to increase a large distance at what you're actually looking at. And you got to take that into account. So the person who put that PSD together, he did it in a way that he could make the furthest objects remain with no parallax, so that he could adjust the thing. He even said it in the file. He said, I chose the mountain peak in the back, and he has a black and white where he shows actual